All right, so now what we want to do is have the discussion about what's on everybody's mind, and that is what are we going to do in our gardens and how are we going to make sure that they start to recover. So I'd kind of like to start it off on this positive note, if I can get my little PowerPoint to work. What is the bright spot in your yard? Can everybody see my neighbor's anemone? I went out for a walk in the neighborhood when the snow was just starting to melt. And there in my neighbor's yard, you brushed aside the snow and was Mina's anemone. Isn't that just gorgeous? Am I pronouncing that right? And so I think it'll be really nice in the time that we have left that we share some of our success stories about what's going on in the garden, what things are happening. But I'd like to start off with Judith just telling us about how things are in our garden and what she's been doing there to help us get our herb garden in Zilker back together. And then Suzanne, I see that you want to share something. So let's start with Judith and then go to Suzanne. So Judith, how did our garden do through all of this storm?
Well, it doesn't look really great as expected. The whole garden center looks very, very frozen. Lots and lots of dead leaves, lots and lots of brown plants that we hope will be coming back. I spent 2 days working with the crew on the garden itself. And in that time, I went down to check out the herb garden. We were going to meet there yesterday, and Kate Laura wasn't feeling well, and Bonnie and I weren't ready to get out. And what we thought was going to be a wet, cold, windy day, it turned out to be only a cold and windy day, but we're going to go tomorrow and do a real evaluation. What's going to happen is that a lot of things will be cut back to 12 to 15 inches, and in hopes that it will come from its root system in the spring.
So Judith, are we able to get our volunteers back in? I know there was a time where they were just limiting it to you and Kate Laura and Bonnie who've been going. Can you provide, can we pitch in?
So far, it's only 3 at a time.
Okay.
So far.
Okay.
But as the weather warms up and more people get vaccinated, the garden is not even open to the public until tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So that might change a little bit as time goes on. But for right now, it's just the 3 regular volunteers, and they're only allowing the Herb Society and the organic gardeners to come because we're the ones that come on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. So we'll keep up with that for now, and I'll let everybody know when we're back in full swing. And we might wind up, when we get into the planting stage, we'll wind up with probably double days in a week. So that'll give a lot of other people an opportunity to come in and help plant and various things like that. We have to establish what's still alive and what's going to make it and what's not going to make it.
Great. Okay. Well, let's see what Suzanne has to say. And then I've got a couple of questions from Elizabeth and Danielle. So let's go to Suzanne and then we'll do the questions in the chat. Go ahead, Suzanne. How's your garden?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised to see several of my herbs did fine. They just didn't even notice the snow and ice. One is a germander plant that looks fine. My thyme and my oregano look the same as they did before. I have a Mexican mint marigold that I had already cut back, and so I can't tell for sure if it's going to be all right or not, but I have a feeling it will be. But what did really well were my dandelions. The flowers were still yellow. The little flowers were still yellow when they came out of the ice. I was amazed. They're something else. And I know my friend and fellow member here, Maxine, I know she cooks them and eats them and loves them, dandelion greens.
That's the Greek in her.
Yes.
Okay, we've got a question from Elizabeth Meek about pruning the sagos. I've heard a little bit about that on the garden shows, but Judith or anybody on the call want to answer that before I share? Susan Norwood, do you want to share that? Unmute yourself. There you go.
A really large sago that has been through a couple of these freezes, and mine right now is bright yellow, looks totally dead. I just cut them all the way back, and then after, in a few weeks, hopefully mine's big. Big. and it should come on back, because the last time it really froze, it did the same thing. But I just cut all of the stuff off of it, and see what happens.
Okay.
That's exactly what will be happening in the prehistoric garden at Zilker. I've seen this before with freezes. They cut everything, all the leaves off. So you're left with just the stalk and the little point at the top where the new leaves come out.
Right.
Now, if we have another freeze, you have to protect that.
Yeah.
Because that is your new growth. So you would want to cover that if there's going to be another freeze between now and when they start budding out. But all the brown leaves go away.
All right, we've got a couple of questions here related to roses. Jan Bland said that her knockout roses still have some blooms. Danielle had a question about roses. Where did that go? A pruning question about pruning roses now, and if so, how much? Judith or anybody else on the question of roses?
15 to 18 inches, depending on how sizable your rose is. 15 to 18 inches of branches down is the normal pruning for any rose, and it's usually done in February. But we don't usually freeze like this in February either, but that's the norm. Valentine's Day is supposed to be the time that you prune your roses.
And Elizabeth has the same issue with her cast iron plants that mine do. Mine are in full surrender. The plants are lying down with bent stems. Do I cut them back or just cut them about a third? Mine weren't looking good to begin with. They were all kind of dry. And I've thought sometimes about just leveling them to the ground and seeing what comes up. Yeah, Judith, what do you suggest on cast iron plants?
Yeah, they have some pretty sturdy root systems. If you've ever tried to dig out cast iron plants, they are not easy to dig out and get rid of if they're in an area where you don't want them to grow. So I would go ahead and just cut them back to the ground, or as close as you can get to the ground, and they'll come back up from their root system, or should. Yeah, especially with a lot of rain.
And I see that Kate Alsabrook's calendula made it. Mine did too, because I'd covered it. Creeping rosemary looks awful, but there's green at the bottom. My poor rosemary is just totally gone, but everything that I've heard says that you cut it down to the base, it should come back from the root. Otherwise, put it on your list of what you're going to get from us on April 15th. A lot of the stuff that I've been hearing listening to the gardening shows is a wait and see kind of thing. Take a look and see what comes back. That stuff that is in the ground, you may lose a crop this year, but that it should come back. But it's looking pretty pitiful out there.
Yeah.
The
reason they're saying that is because you don't want to prune, like my sister-in-law here has a lot of plumbagos. And you don't want to prune them back right now, even though you normally would in a winter, because if there is another freeze, then that tender branch is what's going to freeze this time, and that could kill it. So you kind of want to wait until you see where new growth is going to come out, and then you cut away all the dead stuff at that point.
And that's kind of hard to have it looking like it's looking, although I admit to getting rid of the dead stuff coming up out of my asters. Oh, and Kate, the Menarda that you gave me last year had a lot of dead just from last year that I hadn't cut back yet. So I went out and got rid of just had been dead and dried anyway. And my Menarda is this beautiful green carpet out in the yard. So it has really, really survived. And I always call it Kate Alsabrook's Menarda. And it looks just fabulous. So Judith, if you can help me look at some of the things in the chat, I think your advice about letting it go might last for everything. We've got Rima asking about lavender.
Yeah, I don't know about the lavender yet. The lavender at Zilker looked kind of halfway frozen. So I would say, when lavender gets too dry or starts to die, it turns that very milky gray color. And I would say you could probably cut a lot of that back, but I wouldn't do a lot of pruning on the lavender again, because it's going to want to come up from the bottom part of the branches is where your new growth is going to be, and you don't want to expose that to
Right.
what could be another freeze. And we've had freezes as late as March here, just an overnight freeze, nothing like what we did have. But the rosemaries I found out from people that live in Ohio and Minnesota and place, they freeze every year. They plant rosemary as an annual plant. So those plants are probably not going to come back unless they've got green at the base right now.
And Janet asked about century plants. I heard a cactus story the other day, and it said, you know, all those agaves and whatnot that are just looking so limp and, you know, yucky, that the main thing to do is to look at that center spur. And if you can touch that spur and it doesn't fall over and doesn't feel mulchy, it means that that plant is still alive with that center spur there, and that you can cut the other stuff away. But again, everybody is really advising what Judith says. As hard as it is to look at, just wait a couple of weeks to see what's really going to be going on. Let's see, I've got a whole bunch of other messages there. Oh, something about yarrow.
Let's see, I don't see the
I took a picture of my yarrow in the snow, looking just perfectly happy.
Go yarrow.
Yeah, Aline is saying, hearing from somebody not cutting off until April 1st, not just lavender that looks dead, except roses. Rosemary's gone. Yeah, John, I'm so sorry you're here. Isn't it hard to lose a rosemary bush? I always feel like those are just forever. Oh, and Sylvia had said earlier that her bed of wildflowers, poppies, larkspur, and bluebonnet were all perfectly present. And when the snow melted away, they were perfectly fine. So I love hearing some of these survival stories. Let's see what else. The asparagus ferns are so yellow. Are they dead or will they come back?
Probably not going to come. They might come back from the root, but I would get rid of all the yellow. And you might, again, wait until we have a little bit more of this warm weather and maybe a little bit of rain, because that's going to allow the plants to start recovering. The warming up and then the moisture, whether you're watering or whether it rains on them. I was real disappointed we didn't get the rain yesterday, because the frozen plants could really use it right now.
You know, I wanted to ask you all this. I just love the opportunity to learn from the wisdom of all of you. And what do you think about if in 2 weeks we just schedule a call like this again, and we can all check in? People who want to can check in. I'll set up the Zoom call. We can exchange notes about what's going on in our garden. So today is March 2nd. We'd do it sometime around the 16th, or maybe we do it on, we can all dress up in St. Patrick's outfits and inspired today by Roberta. So would you all be interested in doing this call again in a couple of weeks? Okay, I'll send out a link, and anybody who wants to tune in, we will just have a Q&A amongst all of us, because I certainly love the wisdom of the Austin Herb Society.
And see what Rima is saying about her fennel is coming back at the bottom of the dead part.
And I would suggest that people get pictures so we can set up share screen. Actually, if you send me the pictures before the call, I can create a nice little PowerPoint. And when we talk about signs of spring and signs of survival, I can put your pictures up there. We do need to sign off in a little bit here, because your board's going to meet at 11:30. But before we do, I want to thank our guests again for being here today. Myra Allison, I had the opportunity to get to know Myra. She's with the Yopon Society. She's the secretary there, and they've been one of the clubs that started to use the AAGC Zoom. So I got to know Myra that way, and it's really nice to have you on the call now too. And then we also have Diane Salazar with us today. Was there anybody else who joined Suzanne? Did the other person come in, or is that our two guests?
No, I didn't see, her name is Lynn
Yep,
Cooksey.
Lynn
I haven't seen
Cooksey.
her join in.
Yeah. So it's nice to have everybody here. We'll send something to you. Thank you, Rita. I'm glad that it was a good meeting. It's just so nice when we all get together. And wasn't it like just like being with Bill there in his little lab in his studio? I love that. So I think we are going to do an adjournment, and the board is going to stay on and do our meeting at 11:30. And good, we'd like to hear that you're going to join the Herb Society. Very good. Suzanne will be sending you some information. We'd love to have you. Woo! Thank you all. Yes, on the freeze follow-up call. That's what I'm going to call it, Danielle. Thank you. That's great. Okay, everybody. Happy trails to you all.